we're finishing pens. The first thing that I do when I finish pens is to get the pocket clips, put the zip tie around them, and tumble them before I'm done everything else because they're so light that they need a little bit more tumbling time, and this allows me to do that and still get everything tumbled in a timely fashion. So from there, throw these in the tumbler as I'm going to get my other stuff ready. I always put it in the cylinders. Everything I tumble with pens-wise always goes in the cylinders. Now the sanding of the tubes. To sand the tubes, I use two different pads. I use a light duty hand pad as my first sander, and that's darker. And then for the finishing, I use ultra fine hand pad, which is gray. It just gives a nice finish and consistency after this one is a bit heavier and it gets the marks out easier. All right, now I will get my pens ready. We have dud tips to help with the sanding that are just cylinders that fit into the drill nicely and keep everything concentric when we're sanding everything. I like to put it far enough out so I could get my fingers to the base of the pen. It's important to sand the whole thing because, yeah, there's usually a lot of marks, tip to tip sort of thing. Tighten it down so it doesn't come out anywhere. Put your mask on. So yeah, just sanding. You want to go back and forth, up and down. You want to focus mostly, like you don't want to go rolling over the edges because of the fine milling there. You don't want to terminate those and they'll be useless afterwards. But just going back and forth, you'll see the whole tube change color, and what you're aiming for is a scratch pattern that's going back and forth. You don't want like it being concentric. It doesn't tumble out properly when you do that, so you just want everything sort of muted, and the less scratch marks the better. So that was enough on the rough one. I'm gonna go on the fine one. Right at the very end, you want to go right up to the tip and get everything blended in nicely. Basically all I do is I give it a quick little spin, and if there is any denser marks, they'll be lighter than the actual sanding, so they'll stand out like a sore thumb and you'll be able to see them like instantly when you just spin it. This one is like perfect consistency. Can't really see scratch marks because they're going horizontally more than they are going straight around. And yeah, that one's done. Reverse it, take it off, screw in a dud tip, and that's it. When I get all of them done, after I'm done all the dud tips and like the sanding of the things, I will go back and make sure these get tightened as tight as possible. You could sort of feel them like get tight and bulge. I don't know how to explain it, but it gets like tight. You could feel it like bump, bump, and they're tight. You want them tight. You don't want the tips to come off in the tumbler. If they're already anode before that, it'll ruin the anode on the inside. It'll ruin our threads and it'll ruin our tips. Just something you don't want to happen. So once those are all done, I just literally come over, put them in the tumbler, and they will tumble for an hour. And that's usually however long I always tumble them. Same time every time, 1 hour. If you tumble them, if for some reason you need to tumble them longer than that hour, I would suggest to retighten the tips just because of the vibration and stuff. The likelihood of the tips coming off again are pretty high, and you, again, don't want that to happen. And that's all for tumbling and everything. And then for washing, so when the hour's up, I will get my trusty bucket. Make sure there's no rocks in the bottom, anything nasty that might scratch the finish of our freshly finished pens. Turn that back on. Get the clips and the pens out. I usually count them all, make sure I got everything I put in back out. There's our clips. There's our Saga. Tumbler's done. And over to washing. So for washing, I always try and do all the things, same things at once. I'll do all the pens first, and then I'll do all the tips, and then I'll do all the clips, just so I'm able to count everything out, make sure everything's matching numbers-wise, I'm not missing anything, and it just makes everything very quick because we're doing the one process over and over again. So usually because the tips are so tight, you need a paper towel to undo them afterwards. So I undo it. There's our dud tip that just gets recycled and tumbled over and over again. You could tell they've got marks in them, so you could tell bad ones from the good ones. I put that in my little drawer here. Once that's all filled up and I'm done all my dud tips, every time I'm done a batch of pens, I will fill it up with water, put it in the ultrasonic, turn the heater on and let it go for a full cycle of 60 minutes just to clean everything out. Once it is cleaned out, I will take these back out, rinse everything out because there's dirty water in the bottom. I don't want it sitting in that all night, so I'll rinse them out. Just make sure all that dirty water and anything, sediment and contaminants are washed out so they're clean for the next time I use them. Drain them out and let them dry, so those are done. I could use them next time. For the other part of the pen, like I said, I do the bodies all next after I separate the tips and everything. And for the bodies, there's all tumbling water and grossness inside them, so we want to clean them inside and out. For the inside, we use the brush, soak it in, just give it 1 or 2, 3 pushes through, make sure there's nothing in there anymore, rinse that out, and then I do a quick outer scrub just to make sure the stone wash, there's nothing sitting on the outside of it that'll keep it dirty or make it dirty. Once those are all done, tube-wise, I will just Windex, yeah. So then after all the tubes are done, I will have my, say I did a batch of 20, all my 20 tubes will be there, all washed, ready to go, and then just dry them off. You want to make sure there's no water on them. Try and make sure there's no finger marks. You want them as clean as possible for the next guys when they're assembling them and everything. You don't want them to have to stop assembling to clean something, or you want everything as clean as possible. So then all my tubes would be racked up. When we do rack them up, we will rack them up in the middle like that as finished. And then from the tubes, the tips will go beside them like that. And then from the tips, the clips eventually, once they're clean, will go there. We try and keep them the same way all the time for ease of use when people are assembling them. So for the tips, when I'm cleaning them, same thing, I just use the brush, go inside, want to make sure there's nothing in there, and then I focus on the, I don't know what they're called. The threads, there we go. And yeah, just make sure they're clean, give a scrub to the outside quick, rinse off, same thing. If we had 18 pens, I'd clean all 18 tips, and then go from there to blow them all off. Making sure there's no watermarks on them, nothing left on it anywhere, they're all clean. Oh. And then stack them in the rack. And then from there, all we have left are the clips. With the clips, there's always stuff that sits up in the middle, like up in there, not the middle, but in that sort of recessed area. So the first thing I do when I'm cleaning the clips is always hold that upright and get in there. Just make sure you're able to just knock loose any sort of dirt or particulate that's in there. And then from there, I just do a quick scrub of the outside, quick scrub of the inside, rinse off. Same thing, I'll do that to all of them. Just want your brush to hit everything possible. Make sure that it is clean. Then from there, again, that's my last thing to complete the whole set of pens, is to dry these off one by one. as you're blowing them off, pens and tips as well, you just want to check for consistent tumbled finish too, that everything's uniform. There's no like weird bright marks or dark marks. You just want uniformity throughout. And if not, depending on the situation, you might have to retumble the part if it's gotten scratched pulling out of the tumbler or there's an imperfection from something else. And then with the clips, you have to cut the zip ties off and then rack them. Same way, you want to make sure you have a clip for every tip and every tube so your numbers are on. That's what a finished set of pens, there's only 4 there, but they would continue on and then they'd be in the back too, but the same way, again, for the guys that are assembling them to be as easy as possible to take off the rack without damaging or scratching the products maybe. And then with the zip ties, once they get about that small is when I'll throw them out because they become less useful. They won't spin as good around the clip and it'll sometimes leave a mark from not being tumbled properly. And then ones like this, I just recycle if they're bigger to use again the next time around. And that's basically finishing pens.